Hey, what's up? This is Chris. Welcome to Coding in Public. Today we're working on the third and final installment of our note taker application we've been building out here. And this is the completed version. You can come in here and add like a title, and then you can add some text in here, and then hit submit, and it'll jump it down this way, give you a little alert message here. You can view the note, then close out this little modal. You can delete a note if you want to, and it tells you your note was permanently deleted. And then if you refresh the page, everything is sitting there right on the page. Now, if you want to watch video 1, that looks over the HTML very briefly. Video 2 is a little bit of a longer video, and it goes over all the SCSS. And then today we're going to work strictly on the fun stuff, the JavaScript. So let's dive right in. Okay, so I've gone ahead and just kind of done some pseudocode here so you kind of can tell what we're going to do. And we'll do this kind of in stages here. We're going to start by just selecting some global variables that we're going to use, some query selectors here. And then we're going to create a class that we're going to use to create a new note. Eventually, we're going to store this in local storage, but probably what we'll do next is work on the UI so that as we update it, everything will just show as needed. We'll add some functions here and then also some event listeners. All right, so let's jump in and we're going to start with some query selectors. We need to grab a few things. The note container is the first thing. And this one, if you remember, was just class note container. All right, next we've got the modal container. And again, this was just modal container. And then finally, we need to grab the form. And we're just going to grab the form tag because it's the only one on the page. Okay, so that's all we need for our query selectors. Next, we want to create a class that we can use to generate new notes. So we'll say class, and we're just going to call it note. When we create a new note, we want to run it through a constructor. And this constructor function is going to take in a title and a body that we will pass it. And then we're going to use this to assign a new note, and we'll set simply this, whatever we pass in, dot title is going to be equal to the title we pass in. And then this dot body is going to be equal to the body we pass in. And I think the easiest way to just track this in local storage eventually will be to add an ID to it as well. So this .id, and then you can get a random number by just doing math.random. We're going to use that and hide it in the UI so you won't have to see it or anything, but we can use it to track exactly which one we're going to delete from local storage when we get around to that. Okay, so we've got that note class ready. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to actually be able to submit the form and get a new note. So let's come down here to this event for submitting the form, give ourselves a little more space, and then we will say form.add event listener. And on submit of this form, we want to do a few things. First of all, let's go ahead and grab the event itself. And now if we were to actually try to submit this over here, it would actually refresh the page. We don't want that, so we're going to say e.prevent default, and that will prevent it from doing that. Next, we need to grab a few things. We need to actually grab this title field itself, and then we need to grab the note field and see whatever the value is inside of that. So we'll say const title input is equal to document.querySelector, and we just had an ID on there of title. We'll copy this down, and then not only do we have title input, but we also had note input. So I'll change both of those to say note. So we're grabbing both of those sections, both of those input fields, and then we want to actually validate it. So let's come down here and say validate inputs. What we want to check for is that there's actually something in those fields. So we'll say if title input dot value dot length is greater than 0, so it has to have something in there. And we'll say and if note input dot value dot length is greater than 0, then we're going to use our class to create a new note. So we'll say const new note is equal to new note. And now, if you remember, we've got to pass in up here both a title and a body. So the title we will grab from our title input. So we'll say title input dot value, and then the note input will be just the same except note input dot value. Now, the next thing we'll want to do is as soon as somebody submits something up here, like if you come up here and say like, hi, note, whatever, and then hit submit, wouldn't it be nice if these cleared out and then it auto-selected the title again so you could input another one? So let's do that next. So say title input dot value is going to be equal to nothing. And then same thing down here, except we're going to change this to note. And then we can say title input dot focus. And that will actually focus the cursor back here on this title input. So I can say hi, note, I can submit it, and then it clears those and reselects this. So that makes it a little easier on the user. Now what we need to do is to take this new note and actually show it in the UI. So let's create a function called add note to list, and we're going to pass in our new note. Let's come back up here and we're going to say under create new note in UI, we'll create that function, add new note to list. This is going to take in that note we just sent it. And now what we need to do is create an element and then insert it into the DOM that has all the qualities of our note that we just created. So first let's actually create a div that we can put all this in. So we'll say const new UI note is equal to document.create element, and we just want to create a div. Next, we're going to take that UI note and we're going to say we need a class to it. And if you remember, all of our notes have a class of note. And then we need to add some HTML to that div. So we'll say new UI note.inner HTML is equal to, and then if we do backticks here, we can actually insert a bunch of HTML all together all at once. So now we need to populate this note div with all the elements of our note. So if you look over here, we've got an H2, we've got a paragraph, we've got these buttons. So we'll come in here and add an H2 with a class of note title. And inside of here, this H2, we want to actually interpolate, use kind of E6 template strings here, and we're going to say we want the note.title. So whatever the note that was passed in, we want the title of that object. Okay, next let's copy this down. We're going to change these H2s to paragraph tags, and then we're going to change this note title here and there to a body, I think is what we called that. All right, next we've got a div down here, and this div had a class of note buttons. And again, this is just how we set up the HTML and the CSS. So if you haven't watched that video, go back and grab that. And inside here, we had two buttons. The first button had a class of note button, and then it also had a class of note view. And it just said view detail. And then let's copy this down. And this one said delete note, and it had a class of note delete. Now there's one other thing we created when we did this class, and that's this ID. Now we don't want it to show in the UI, and so what we can do is just come in here, let's just add a span, and we can just add the attribute hidden, and it won't show in the UI. And then we can come in here and say we want the note.id, and let's just close out that span tag. So what we've done now is we have submitted on the form submit, we've submitted a new note, and we've added it using this function. We're trying to add it to the UI. We've created a div. We've now populated that div. So the last thing we need to do is grab our global variable for that note container and append a child to it. And the child we're appending is our new note. Okay, so let's come inside here. And you'll notice all that HTML here is the same thing we've done. Let's see, where's our form, our notes here. Note, note title, note body, note button. So let's go ahead and remove these since they don't exist anyhow. We're going to try to manually add these rather than have them sitting here already. So let's clear that out. And now let's come in here and say like, hi, this is a note. All right, and submit it. And let's see what's going on here. Let's inspect the page. Uncaught, add note to list is not defined. Okay, let's make sure we named everything correctly. Add new note to list. Okay, well, that would make sense. Add note to list. Let's try this again. Hi, this is a note. Come down here, submit. New note is not defined. New UI note. Okay, one more time. We'll come in here and say, hi, this is a note. There we go. Okay, so our note's showing up. And we can do this multiple times. And because it's auto-selecting up here, note title, let me just add some filler text here. And we'll say submit. And there it is. Okay, cool. So everything's showing up. But if I refresh the page, everything disappears. And that's because we haven't added it yet to the actual local storage, which is totally fine. Now we could do several things next, but let's go ahead and let's work on the note buttons themselves. So if I come in here and I've got a note, like hi, note, these buttons here, this view detail and the delete note. Now if we try to grab these up front, they don't yet exist on the DOM. But what does exist is the actual note container. So we can use that note container that we grabbed as a global variable and then just see what we're clicking on inside of that to determine which button we're clicking on. So let's come in here and we're going to say note container dot add event listener, and we're listening for a click. And we definitely want to make sure we grab that event itself. And then let's come in here and let's just console log the e.target. And when we do that, if I can pull this up here and add a note, click here and we're getting the button itself. Here we're getting delete. Here we're getting the actual note. So the only thing we're interested in is these two buttons when we're clicking. So we can write some if statements to make sure that we're clicking on one of those two. So we can say e.target.classlist.contains, and there's an includes and an contains, and the way I remember is class contains. So if that helps you, it's free. Classlist.contains, and what we're looking for is that it contains note view. So let's first of all work on that one. And if it does, we want to do a few things. First of all, we want to figure out what the current note is. So we'll say const current note is equal to e.target.closest. This searches up the DOM tree. We want to find the closest note. All right, that's the note, the parent container to our, well, the grandparent container to our button there. Next, let's figure out the current title, and we'll just come back down the DOM tree here. So we'll say the current title is now equal to current note dot query selector. And we're going to look for the note title. We don't just want the actual tag, we want the text content inside. Next, we need to grab the body. So we'll come in here and say current body. And this is equal to note double underscore body and the text content there. So now what we've done is when we click on that view button, it'll actually show us grab the current note, grab the current title, the current body. Now what we want to do is when we click on that, we want to populate the modal with those things. So we're going to write another function here. We're going to call it activate note modal. We're going to pass it the current title, and we're going to pass it the current body. Let's now write that function. So we'll come up here and say activate note modal, and it's going to take in a title and it's going to take in a body. Now you remember the modal contains its own title field and its own body field. So let's go ahead and grab those as constants. So we'll say modal title is equal to document.querySelector.modal title. And then the modal body is the same thing here. It is equal to modal body and modal body. So what we want to do next is update that modal title dot text content with the title that we pass in, and we want to update the modal body dot text content with the body that we've passed in. Finally, we want to activate that modal container. I realized I spelled this incorrectly. Container. Let's see, container. Okay, let's come back here. And we haven't finished it, so I saved it accidentally out of habit. But let's go ahead and add the class list. And you remember we added a class active, and that activates the modal itself. I also failed to add the function keyword here. Okay, there we go. So let's come in here again. Hi, submit, and then hit view detail, and everything should populate. All right, now normally you're not going to have a title that small, so we're having a little bit of overlap, but most of the time that won't be the case. So now what we need to do is work on this actual button itself so that we can close the modal, and then we'll get back to our note buttons. So let's work on this event for closing the modal. So let's say const modal button is equal to document.querySelector, and that's just called modal button. And then we'll add the event listener directly here. We're listening for a click. And whenever we click, we just want to say modal container .classlist .remove active. Now if I come here and refresh, I'm going to have to re-add everything. I failed to add that curly bracket. Now I'm going to have to re-add everything here. So title note here and lorem whatever. Okay, submit, come down here, open this up, and now we should be able to close this and everything disappears. All right, so we're starting to get some functionality. This is good. All right, now we've done one button here. We've done this view detail. Now we actually need to delete the note itself. Let's do another if statement here. We'll say if, and let's just grab this right here. Except this time we're not looking for note view, we're looking for note delete. And we want to go ahead and grab this current note as well, so we'll just scope it here and call it the same thing. And now we're going to want to just say current note dot remove. All right, so this is a little bit easier. We just have to grab the grandparent, come in here, and when we click it, it should grab the grandparent itself and then delete the note, remove it off the DOM. Okay, so we've got some basic functionality. You can enter a title, a text, and then submit it, and then you can show it and you can hide it. Now you remember on our final form here, when we hit submit, we get this little message here if we don't have anything in. If we delete a note, we get a message. If we add a note, we get a message as well. So let's work on those alert messages. So let's come up here to our function. We've got show alert message. So we'll say function show alert message. We're going to pass in a message and we're going to pass in a class. Let's come down here. First of all, we need to create a div. So we'll say alert div, and this is what we can insert into the DOM. So we'll say document.create element. We're going to create a div, and then we're going to say alert div.class name. And you remember we gave it a class. We gave it the class of message, but then we also gave it another class, and that depended on what kind of message it was. So we can use that class that we've passed in here and just say we're going to apply the class itself. And I think we need to call this something other than class, since that's a special word here. We'll just say like alert class. Okay, we'll grab that in here. So now we've passed in something which we'll pass in down below here, but it will be some message and then an actual alert class. We've created a div and applied that class to it along with the kind of the parent class of message that applies to all three. Now let's come in here and we want to actually insert this just before the form, and that's a global variable that we added up top. So we'll say insert adjacent element, and then you just need to give it where you want it to insert it. So we'll say before begin, that means before the actual form tag itself, and then tell it what you want to pass in. And we want to pass in that alert div will be the thing that's inserted. Now if we create a new note, if we delete a note, or if we need to add more like detail to a note, like you need to add a title or a note field or whatever, all three of those messages, it'd be helpful for the user if this title field is auto-selected next. So let's go ahead and grab that constant again. Let's see, I've got the modal title somewhere here already. Maybe we can add that to a global variable so we're not overusing it. All right, that took way too long to find here, but it's this title, not the modal title, the actual form title. So let's grab it up here, and we'll just add it up top here. And now we can come back down and we will say title input dot focus and focus on that. Now, it'd be nice if after we run some message here that it would automatically remove itself. So we can do that by just doing set timeout. And then we need to write a function. We'll just do it as an arrow function here. We'll just say alert div dot remove. All right, so get that out of the DOM, and we'll do it after 2 seconds. All right, now we need to actually use this show alert message and pass something in. So we've got a few different options here. Number one, what happens if they successfully add a note? Let's see, where's our form here? Down this way. So we do want to actually, after we clear everything out, we want to show the alert message, and we're going to pass in note successfully added. And the alert class we're going to pass in here is success message. This is the class that will apply that green color to it. Now, if this is not successful, we want to come down here. In other words, if they haven't put anything that has a length on the title and a length on the note, we want to say show alert message. And this time we're going to change the message up. And the message will say, please add both a title and a note. And instead of success message, we're going to have alert message. And then we had one other use case, which is when we delete a note itself. So we'll come up here to the note delete. This message needs to say your note was permanently deleted. And this had the class of remove message. All right, let's save that and come in here. And if we click this and there's nothing there, we should be getting a note that's actually being passed here. So let's come back up here and make sure that we've added everything we need. Our alert message here, so we've added a class. Okay, so we haven't actually added the text, the message itself in here. So we can say alert div, and let's just append in here a child. That'll be a document.create text node. All right, so we're just going to create text directly in the div. So we'll say message, and then let's see how this works. Come over here and hit submit. And there we go. We get both a title and a note. Say hi, title, lorem1, hit submit, note successfully added. Come down here and delete the note. Your note was permanently deleted. So that's cool. It updates for us automatically. And because we've added the class, we can determine which kind of note it is. Now it's time to work with the local storage. Let's come all the way up here to the top, and we've got some functions here to write for retrieving notes from local storage, adding notes, and removing notes. So first of all, let's retrieve the notes. So we'll just say get notes, and we'll say let notes, and we're going to just declare it out front here. And then we're going to use an if statement to say if local storage, and then the way you retrieve things is say get item, and then you name whatever they are. So we're going to name it note app.notes. All right, now it's important to name this something unique that you're not going to overwrite later, especially if you're obviously working on like a team with several other people. So that's why I've kind of namespaced it to the note app .notes. We'll come into here and we'll say if it's equal to null. So if it doesn't have anything, then we're just going to say let notes equal to just an empty array here. We'll say else, in other words, if there is something there, then say notes is equal to, now this is going to come back to us as a string, so we actually need to parse it. So we'll say json.parse local storage .get item. And we're going to get that same thing, note app.notes. At the end here, just so we can see what's going on, we'll say console.log notes. And then let's go ahead and manually run this. Just say get notes. And if we run it here, you'll see we get an empty array. Now, depending on what browser you're in, this will show differently, but in Chrome here, it's an application and it's under local storage. And we'll come in here and you see we've got no key value pairs at all. So the next thing we need to do is actually add a note to the local storage. So let's write this function here. Let's give ourselves a little more space. Say function add note to local storage. And we'll pass in a note here. We're going to use our creating a note down below and actually call this function. So we'll say const notes is equal to get notes. So it'll first retrieve whatever is currently in the local storage. And then we'll say notes.push note. And then we will set the local storage to notes once again. This time we'll say set item. We'll call it again, note app.notes. And this time we need to actually stringify it to send it back as a string. So we'll say stringify notes. Okay, now we need to actually call this function when we create a new note. Let's go all the way back down to our form. And after we've added it to the list of the UI here, we can now add it to the local storage. We'll say new note. All right, let's save this and then add a note title and body. And we are getting an error. Let's see what our error is. Push of undefined. And I'm realizing we never returned. I don't think we ever returned the actual notes from storage here. So we need to return this. So we'll say return notes. And then let's try this again. Title, body. And we have a stingify. That's not going to help. We need stringify. This is why we test things. Title, body, third time, come on. All right, let's check our local storage. Something happened. Hey, there we go. All right, so we've got multiple things going on here. We've got a title, which is our title. We've got our ID, which is that random generated number that's hidden in the UI. And then we've got the body, which is body. All right, that's cool. Now when we refresh, it's still there, but it's not updating in the UI. So let's write a function that will update whenever we refresh or come to this page again. It'll actually refresh the UI whenever the window loads there. So first of all, let's come in here and we'll say show notes in UI. Let's write something called function display notes. And for here, we're just going to say const notes equals to get notes. Again, using that retrieve function. We'll say notes for each note. We want to run it through our add note to list. And we're going to pass it that note. Now this add note to list, remember, is the UI actual function that will populate the UI. So now if we refresh, oh, well, we haven't called this yet. So what we want to do is call that whenever we refresh. So let's come down here and add an event listener for displaying the notes. So we'll say document.add event listener. That event will be the DOM content loaded. So when the page loads, we want to run display notes. We're just going to call it like that and let the event listener do the work. So when we refresh, there it is. Again, we've still got that working. We've still got this delete note working. But now when we refresh, it never deleted it from the actual local storage. So it's still sitting there. So we've got at least one more thing to do, and that is to remove the note from the local storage. So let's come back here and we're going to say function remove note. And we're going to pass it an ID, and I'll show you how we're going to do this in a moment. Again, we're going to say const notes is equal to get notes. Use that retrieve function, and then we'll say notes for each. And then we're going to pass in two things. First of all, we're going to pass in the note itself, and then we're going to pass in the index. This is available to us because this is an array we're working off of. That array is what we got from the local storage. So we'll say if note.id is equal to the ID that was passed in, then we want to say notes.splice at the index, and we're only going to remove one. Then we'll come down here and we'll say local storage .set item note app.notes json.stringify, not stingify, and notes. Not notes, but note, but notes. All right, now what we need to do is call this remove note and actually pass it an ID. Now that ID is that random generated number. So we need to go back to the actual delete function. So we were watching these note buttons, and here's where we watched the delete. Now, even though we inserted that ID and it's hidden there in the DOM, we haven't ever selected it. So we actually need to select it. So we'll come in here and say const ID current note, which is what we've already grabbed up here, dot query selector. What we're looking for is the span. Remember, we added that in a span tag, and we're looking for the text content. And we're going to call our function remove note ID. Now, if we just pass it like this, it's not going to work because the text content is actually a string. So even though it's a number, it's going to pass it in as a string. So what we need to do is wrap this in a number like this, and then it should pass us the ID itself. So if I come in here and click delete note, it removes it, and it says your note was permanently deleted. So note title delete note, submit, it shows up there. If we refresh the page, it stays there. Hit view detail, everything shows. Hit delete note, it is removed. To my eye, that looks like a completed project. So great job. Hopefully that was fun for you, and you can kind of see how we went through the process of figuring out what we needed to do, and then slowly, kind of one after the other, just worked through that. Because we wrote functions that were kind of helper functions, we could both add to local storage and to the UI very quickly and easily by calling those separately. And so hopefully that was fun for you. If you have any questions or if you run into any trouble, let me know, and I'm happy to help however I can. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe and like the video. That will really help me know if this is the kind of thing that you like to see. And if you have any suggestions, feel free to leave those in the comments. All right, until next time, happy coding. Thanks for joining me.